Hi guys, so today I did my OR observation, and the roles of the registered nurses that I saw in the preoperative, intra-op, and PACU were the pre-op nurse responsibilities were mainly to provide information and like emotional support to the patient, making sure that the patient was aware of what was going on and like knew what procedure they were going to have and all that, and also making sure that the family was informed about what was happening and kind of making sure to keep them updated with information about their loved one. The pre-op nurse also made sure that the vitals were taken beforehand. There was like a baseline status before they went into surgery. The intraoperative nurse was the one that was inside the OR, and they were it was mainly either a circulating nurse or a scrub nurse, and they were just making sure that they were like documenting and grabbing any additional like items needed that the doctor needed or the scrub nurse needed. That's what the circulating nurse did, and the scrub nurse was right there helping the doctor, like passing them any instruments they needed and kind of being that second hand for the doctor. The PACU nurse, so once the patients were out of surgery and in recovery, they stayed with them to make sure the patient was waking up safely and that their vitals were taken, their level of conscience was coming back, and just overall just making sure that the patient was doing good after surgery. So the role that the circulating nurse did was mainly documenting, making sure that any little thing that was happening, the nurse was documenting it, making sure that she wasn't forgetting anything. In the OR, the doctor even once said during the surgery that the nurse is the eyes and ears for her when she was operating. Whatever she's not seeing, the nurse is seeing, and the nurse is being aware of it, paying attention, making sure everything's being followed and everything's going as planned. I don't know if I'd ever consider working at the circulating nurse, just because I was mainly a lot of sitting down and documenting, and I kind of want to be more up and moving. So that was kind of a different, like seeing a different type of nursing to be, but it was still pretty cool, like how involved she was, and obviously her documenting is a big part of the whole surgical process. So how does the nurse protect patients from harm during the surgical procedure? The nurse was making sure that when the patient came in that they were positioned correctly, making sure that they had these foam pads on like their elbows and on their feet, so they weren't, if it was like a longer surgery, so they weren't like getting any like soreness or anything waking up. They said a story that one patient once, when they woke up, they complained their heels were hurting because of how long they were on the bed. So the nurse was making sure that the patient was comfortable when being placed before surgery, and also making sure that the scrub nurse and doctor are making sure they're not breaking sterile field. There was one part where the scrub nurse accidentally touched the circulating nurse when they were handing her something. She's like, oh hey, like you touched me, and the scrub nurse didn't even know. She's like, oh my gosh, and then she like right away took off her glove and got a new one. So that was a big part of making sure the patient was safe. Are there any policy and procedures that the facility used to ensure the safety of the patients? Yes, making sure that sterile field is being followed and that all the steps are being taken care of. Also making sure the timeout is being called to make sure to identify the patient, the procedure, and the site, so that doesn't go unnoticed. How was timed out done, and who participated in it? Everyone participated in the timeout. The first surgery I saw, the doctor kind of said, oh, we're ready for timeout, and then the circulating nurse grabbed her papers and made sure she shared all the information out. So everyone was involved in it. The second two times, the circulating nurse asked the doctor, are you ready for a timeout? And the doctor would say yes, and then she'd state all the information, all of it, making sure everything the nurse was saying was correct. So it was kind of a big group participation, and everyone was making sure everything was being correctly identified and right information. Was the patient's privacy protected and respected at all times? How was it violated, or did anyone advocate for the patient? The patient's privacy was protected throughout the whole surgery. They always made sure that the patient was covered before the surgery started, and until the procedure started, they would slowly start uncovering those parts, but besides that, everything else was covered and made sure they was taken care of. I even saw a part where the nurse would put like this inflatable like heating blanket to make sure that the patient was safe during that time as well. So that was one of the big reasons how the patient was protected, was making sure that they weren't just being exposed to everyone. Like the doors were closed, blinds were closed, so not anyone could see what procedure was going on. What is sponge count? How is it done? And who is responsible for doing it? A sponge count was basically before the procedure started, if the scrub nurse would start counting all the sponges she would have. So there was like different type. There was one that was like lap pads and everything. So she'd count it in front of the circulating nurse out loud, and then they'd document it on a whiteboard so everyone in the surgery, like in the operating room, could see. And if for some reason they ran out of laps or anything and they needed more, they'd when the nurse would grab more, they'd count it again and add it to the laps already used. And they do this before the procedure and after the procedure was done. They made sure to count so all the laps were counted for and there was none missing. They also used a little wand that they'd wand around the patient, that they had like a little chip, I think they said, in some of the sponges. So if one was accidentally left inside the patient, it would like go crazy and make sure to like alarm him that, okay, there's something in the patient. How is report given when the patient is transferred from the pre-op to the operating room and from the operating room to the PACU? So the doctor and nurse would come to the patient and make sure to like introduce themselves again, explain the procedure, and ask the patient if they had any additional questions before the procedure started. And from the operating room to the PACU, it was mainly the nurse and the nurse anesthetist, I can't pronounce it, anesthetist, would go over the patient vitals and make sure that the patient was awake safely and that they were fully alert and conscious before they'd left them in the PACU for recovery. Identify 1 or 2 nursing diagnoses during intra-op. I would say 2 nursing diagnoses would be risk for infection if sterile field were to be broken and no one took the initiative to restart it. That can be a harmful thing for the patient and could possibly cause an infection, which would delay their recovery and have more complications in the future. And also risk for aspiration. There was one patient where the nurse had intubated them, and it kept on coming out a little bit from the patient's mouth, so then they had to make sure that it was like going back in their mouth and it wasn't coming out. So just those little things were big risks that could be during surgery. Overall, what did you learn from this experience, and what did I like or dislike about this experience? I learned a lot. I learned a lot, like what the circulating nurse and scrub nurse do, how involved they are in the surgeries, and how important it is to make sure that the timeouts are being called so there's nothing, like no mistakes happening, or the patient's getting the right procedure and what they need done. It was a really cool experience. I got to see a lot of cool surgeries, such as like a facelift, which was very interesting. I don't know if I'd necessarily like to be an OR nurse, just because I know for a circulating nurse they were documenting a lot, and I don't think I'd be able to sit there for a long period of time. But besides that, I had a really good time, and it was really nice to see a different field of nursing and see kind of how they cooperate in the OR and everything that's happening. So, yep.